My name is Felicia Ford, and I am the president and founder of the Freddie Ford Family Foundation. I am the mother of 3 children on the autism spectrum, and I founded this organization to help support underserved families with autism. Today, our featured speaker is Tiffany Joseph. She is an autistic adult, parent, and advocate. Before we get started, I just ask that everyone please try to stay muted if you have any questions. And for those in the chat, we try to get to you. And as a reminder, this presentation today will be recorded. So thank you again for joining us for Thriving with Autism, presented by the Freddie Ford Family Foundation. And our featured speaker is Tiffany Joseph. So Tiffany, could you tell us about yourself and the communication device you'll be using today?
Yes, and I will be using my AAC device to do so, which will speak for me.
Hi, I am Tiffany. I am 39. I'm a mom to 3 children. The 2 oldest are diagnosed with autism and ADHD. My youngest has sensory processing disorder and ADHD. I am currently separated from their father. I myself was diagnosed with Asperger's at age 19 and again with autism in my 30s. That latest diagnosis is what led to my oldest son's autism being discovered, and then later, my daughter.
So, for those of you who are not familiar with assistive technology, using her device. So, Tiffany, can you tell us about how you were diagnosed, what that was like, and when you were diagnosed?
So the first time was at 19. I was in my freshman year of college, and I was having basically a breakdown. I just couldn't do anything else, and so I was sent to the college psychological whatever center, and that's where I got the Asperger diagnosis.
And what were you told when you were diagnosed? Like, what was it described to you?
So at the time, I was I was more depressed and anxious and feeling out of control. So that diagnosis was kind of like it didn't seem important at the time because I was literally suffering with a deep depression. But I was told that it just meant I have some social awkwardness and I'm smart, which is stuff I already knew about, so I didn't really pay attention to what it meant at the time. Plus I was 19, so I didn't really want to have anything wrong with me.
So how did you feel about it when you got your diagnosis?
At that time, I didn't really feel, okay, well, I guess I could say at the time I felt a little bit embarrassed to have any kind of thing wrong with me.
And did you share it with anyone at the time when you were diagnosed?
No.
You just kept it to yourself?
Yep.
So when were you, I know you were diagnosed the second time, when was that?
That was a few years ago. I was having a similar breakdown, similar depressive state, and extremely anxious, like severe anxiety. And that's when I got the diagnosis of autism.
And then what did they
amongst other things.
What did they tell you about it the second time you were diagnosed? Anything?
There's a little bit more accurate information, but this time I actually looked it up, did my own research,
Okay.
and started talking with other autistic people at this time.
So was it easier to accept the second one?
No, I feel like I still had a little bit of shame. First of all, I didn't know that they were the same diagnosis either until later. But getting this, what I thought was a new diagnosis was, I felt a little bit embarrassed, a little bit of shame, but because I did more research and I learned about other autistic people who are advocating for pride and stuff, that shame eventually erased.
So now, fast forward, let's now that you're more of an advocate, how do you help people, or do you get past that initial shame especially when they're getting diagnosed at an older age?
I think now I'm just, I don't know if I specifically help people get past the shame that they feel, but I do know that there are more strengths than weaknesses that come with this diagnosis. So if you look for them, I do share them a lot on my social media, and I do talk about pride a lot.
So what are some strengths that come with the diagnosis?
So it's different for everybody because we all have different traits, but for me in particular, I know I can hear music differently than other people and more clearly and better, and I can hear a sound and replicate it on an instrument or with my voice. And I can memorize a long series of numbers. I can read anything and remember it once. I don't ever have to see it again. So having a great memory is one. And then I think because I'm visually sensitive, I notice things that other people don't. And I can see things, I feel like brighter because people don't notice things that I notice. So I feel like they're not seeing it like I am.
Oh, okay. And what would you think, or from your perspective, what are the weaknesses?
So those same strengths can be weaknesses. Like I'm super sensitive to light and sound to the point where they can be painful if it's wrong. Yeah, and then obviously the social aspects, speaking issues. Yeah.
So just to back up, when you're saying like the lights can be painful, what is it about the light? And like what kind of pain? Like in your head, like migraine, or can you describe that at all?
So with lights, if they're too bright, they drown out every other visual thing. They take over everything I'm looking at, and yeah, they produce pain in my eyes. I wouldn't say my brain and my head, but my eyes definitely hurt. Sometimes lights move. I don't feel other people see the flicker in the lights, especially very bright fluorescent lights. I notice there's a flicker going on that drives me really to be dysregulated and exhausted.
Okay. So just the impact sometimes can be what's difficult with light. And do you have issues with sound?
Oh yeah, definitely. Um, so it's not the loudness of sound, it's the pitch, the tone of the sound, like the quality of the sound. I cannot stand hearing more than one voice at a time because my brain, I feel like neurotypical people can filter out one of those sounds and listen to them, whereas I hear all the voices at once, and it's like they're all coming in talking, and I can understand all the conversations at one time. So that gets very overwhelming eventually, especially when I'm in a crowd. You just hear little whispers. I mean, even far away will sound close to me. I don't know why voices are like that. People cough from far away. It sounds like they're coughing next to my ear. I can't stand the like the alto sax, the higher octave in music. I can't stand that. And that's actually what I played, so it's quite kind of annoying. One of the instruments I played for years.
Well, that's really helpful for me to, and I'm sure other people to understand, because sometimes, like, I don't know, my kids will say, that's too loud, that's too loud, but too loud is really probably the easiest way to express it being difficult to handle noise.
Yeah, right.
That is.
If they knew the words, they would say that's overwhelming, but
Right.
to kids it's too loud.
And see, for someone else that doesn't have that concern, it's like you don't understand. It's not that loud in here, but it's everything else that's too loud.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it could be a mixture of sounds because we don't have the filter. Like, I think neurotypicals have like a background sound. There's no background sound. It's all the same sound. It's all getting our attention in the same way. So if there's mixtures of sounds, like if you're outside and there's, somebody knocking, then you have a dog barking, then you have tires going on the road, hitting rocks or something. All that sounds just as important to our brains. And I notice people don't notice those sounds, like those little sounds that are always going on in the background.
That is definitely helpful to understand exactly how you take in sounds. It's not like the rest of us. You just block it out. You feel it and you hear it all. So that's
yeah, there's no blocking, unfortunately.
So that's something to keep in mind for those of us who have children on the spectrum or come in contact with people on the spectrum, that the loud just takes on a whole nother meaning because it's everything. So let's switch gears now and back up and talk about your childhood. Since you were diagnosed later, I would like to hear more about what it was like growing up, because were you different? Did you feel different?
Oh, yes. And I will use that, I will talk about that on my AAC device.
I would say it was more so that others made me constantly aware that I am different. It didn't matter if it was other kids, adults, family, everyone. Always mentioned how different I was and how different I spoke. Plus, eventually it became obvious because my interests were never aligned with people my age. I really thought they were weird and they thought the same thing.
So what, was there anything in particular that your issues were that you could share that people thought were different?
Well, pretty much everything I was into, but I had a lot of different obsessions growing up. I've always been into medical science and medical books, and I remember, I think it was sixth grade or fifth grade, I got really into gait analysis, like GAIT gait, like how people walk and the way they should be wearing shoes and how their bones make them put their feet on the ground, and how, if that was different ways that was good absorption or not for their bodies. And I got into orthodontistry really heavily at one point. That was definitely sixth grade. I remember that. I kept the one library book from braces for the entire sixth grade year, if I remember what year it was. And they had to come looking for me before the year was over for that book.
Now, do you have any recollection of like why certain things would interest you more than others? Did you just notice it more, or?
I have no idea. It's like they picked me.
So, what, if any, struggles did you have that you can now, being older, relate back to autism?
So I'm going to use my AAC device for a portion of this.
I have always had trouble sitting still for any length of time and controlling certain impulses, like jumping or running. That gets a kid in a lot of trouble. I needed constant stimulation and vestibular input.
So not being able to control my body, just being very impulsive, even though my brain was trying to tell my body, you know, you're going to get in trouble if you do this, but my body would do it anyway. So that gets a kid in a lot of trouble, that I couldn't control any of it. Also, I would look at other kids and they'd be able to say what they want when they want it. That was always like amazing to me, like just having the complete speech control. And I was a huge sensory speaker. Now I'm more averse to a lot of my sensory sensitivities, but back then I was a huge speaker. I needed constant stimulation, and that's hard for adults to put up with. I know now as an adult, but back then my body and brain was always seeking out something new or something new to do.
So when you say sensory communication seeker, is that what you said? What do you mean by that?
So now I bright lights and sounds may get to me, but back then I would seek out all that stuff. My body constantly craved motion, craved bright lights, craved everything.
So did you get the urge a lot to just move around?
Yeah, I never could sit still, never.
And when it came to sounds, like, were you drawn to music or anything like that?
Oh yeah. I was listening to music 100% of the time.
Anything in particular?
So younger, I listened to classical music, and then in fifth grade, I got really heavily into George Gershwin, and I only listened to music that came from the Gershwin. And basically, all of my music tastes are still informed by my passion for the Gershwin music.
And did anyone in particular turn you on to classical music, or did you just hear it one day and think, oh?
On my dad's side of the family, they're all classical musicians.
Okay.
Yeah. But I was the only kid in my generation that took to it so hard. I mean, it was hard. It was, I feel for my parents because there was no other music in their life when I was around.
But there's worse music.
Yeah, there is. That's true. I didn't listen to like kid songs or anything, so I guess that's a benefit for them.
Yeah, because the wheels on the bus, they keep going round and round. So, so let's talk about as a parent. I sometimes struggle with my children's personality and autism behaviors. Can you tell the difference between things unique to Tiffany versus things that may have been because of autism?
No, autism is a huge part of my personality because my brain, the very thing that creates my thoughts, is autistic.
And that's a great way to put that, because a lot of people or parents or, they don't understand that a person, autism is they're all about that. That's who they are. It's not something you
Yeah.
out. Just like personality, if the strong-willed autistic child, the strong-willed neurotypical child, it's just one person, and that's just part of who you are.
And I couldn't begin to unwrap or unravel all of my different identities because they all make up me. It's not one or the other. I can't separate myself or my experiences or how my brain is into different pieces.
And that's good for people to understand. It is just you are one being, and autism is just part of that being.
Mm-hmm.
So let's switch gears, and now let's start talking about family and parenting. So you have 3 children, and am I correct? You have 3,
Yeah,
and how many are on the spectrum?
2.
2. So what is it like parenting autistic children and a neurotypical child?
I think it's probably like any home with autistic kids. A lot of innovating how to meet our collective and differing needs happens a lot.
Were you able to hear that?
That's the second portion of that. Can you play it again?
I think it's probably like any home with autistic kids. A lot of innovating how to meet our collective and differing needs happens a lot.
So can you explain that a little bit more?
So we all have differing sensitivities or sensory needs, but we all have to work together even with that.
Is there someone that needs to mute? So let's see. So, and as an autistic adult, do you find yourself really understanding your 2 autistic children? Not better, if you relate more? to them?
I think I do. I think I can relate to a lot of their traits. Like my son actually has very similar autistic traits as me, where my daughters are like the opposite scale of autistic traits. Um, so it really does depend on the child and the parent and how their personalities are. But I think I do relate to some of the sensitivities, some of the social problems they might have, some of the things in school that they're going through. So I think I can help them a little bit more because I have experience.
And do you ever get the sense that your neurotypical child might not see you all differently, but see your ability to interact and understand each other a little different? Like, do you think he
Uh,
picks up on it, or?
no, I really don't think he. Well, he's not neurotypical. He has ADHD and sensory processing disorder. He's just not autistic. So autistic people say he's autistic. If he's not autistic, he's autistic. But I don't think that he notices anything different because he's never had anything different. There's no. I do notice his social ease, his ease with other things that we don't have, but I don't think he notices it because, he's never had anything different, and he's the youngest of everybody.
Okay. 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 So, did you notice right away that they were autistic, or when did you explain to your children autism?
So no, I didn't notice, partially because I had, like I said, done no research on my previous Asperger's uh, Asperger's diagnosis, which maybe I might have noticed had I cared at that time. Also, my brother is autistic. He was actually diagnosed as a young child, but I'm 8 years older than him, so I wasn't really paying attention to all that then either. So I think because my kids were just like me, just like my brother, I have my kids had cousins at their same age that are autistic as well, and none of us parents noticed anything different because we were just sitting there with our 3 autistic kids playing with each other all the time, not knowing they should be talking by now, they should be doing certain things. We didn't know. So none of us, all of those kids were diagnosed later in life, including my kids.
So so what age were your children diagnosed?
So my son, the year I was diagnosed, so that was age 11, and my daughter was 9.
So they were diagnosed at 9, 11, and
yeah, and my daughter actually, I didn't notice her traits at all. I wasn't even aware. All I knew was my kids had ADHD, certain learning disabilities, but it wasn't until her, oh no, she was 10, I think. Yeah, she was 10. Her 5th grade year, that her school came to me and was like, she should get evaluated for this. And I was like, oh my gosh, how did I miss it? And I was actually kind of upset that, my parents and schools missed my diagnosis, but then I did the same to my daughter. So then I'm like, maybe there really is a thing about it being harder to decipher in girls. But now that I know, it's obvious. Like all of their traits are obvious. It just took me forever to notice because they were so much like me. They were just like regular kids to me. Like I didn't see the problem.
So what are the signs in girls, since you now know, one, I know she's more like you, but were there any particular signs you can point to that were like, oh yeah, that's autism?
The way she would relate to other children. For her, she was the boss, and if she wasn't the boss, you were getting handled immediately. There was no allowing them to play or do anything. Also, she's very visually gifted. Like, she could make dolls' clothes at like age 1 or 2 that looked like they could go on the runway, and she would make them out of gloves and different things around the house. And people don't think when a girl's playing with her toys they think that she's playing with her toys, but they don't see, okay, she literally was playing with her doll clothes for hours without interacting with any of us. And I didn't pay attention to that. I just thought it was like, oh, well, she's playing with her toys. Like, that's what little girls do. I never played with dolls, so I just was like, oh, okay, so that's what little girls do, you know? I was not the average little girl, so I didn't know.
So would she play with the dolls and the clothes, or more the clothes?
She would make clothes for the dolls. So it was more about the fashion.
Right.
Still very into that at 12, almost 13, she'll be 13 next month. She's still very like heavily into that. And she can sew, she sewed her own dress when she was 6 years old. I mean, just this visual sense that I should have noticed was like, okay, that's a little too much for your age. You know that, and it's something that I didn't have. I'm not a visual person whatsoever. Like art, no. My art is music, but she's a great visual artist.
So I remember playing with dolls, and it was more like, you get them and you let them talk to each other and you do their hair, but you make them interact. So that's now I can actually see how you could see a child playing with something, but they're not playing the way, making them interact. They're playing with them as an accessory to the activity they're doing, but not necessarily
Exactly.
playing with them.
Right. The dolls were means to the hair and the clothes. The dolls were never like humans.
Or representations of humans.
Yeah.
And so when you think now about signs for autism, do you see a difference between your son and your daughter, like the signs of it?
Yes. Yes. He was a little bit more soft when it comes to certain things. Like, he was rough. Like, he would, instead of getting off of couches, like backing off like she did, my oldest would just every time, no matter what, just launch himself off. He didn't care about the pain or whatever. And when she came, I was like, oh, okay, this is how girls are. They do things that protect themselves a little bit better. But otherwise, I would say, if you look at her different traits, it's something I should have noticed.
It's funny because like I said, I have 3 boys, and like you said, they just launch themselves. They don't ever actually do the things that are subtle. Everything is
right.
big. Everything has a lot of movement and action. And
Yes.
you can tell they feel everything. When you jump off something and hit the floor, you feel that.
Yeah.
So looking back, it's so simple to see these subtle things, and that's got to be a sensory thing for touch. that they need to feel everything when they do those acts.
Yeah. The banging, the movement. Yeah. But I was like that as a kid too. It was from the way my parents described me. I was too much like that as a kid.
And then did you do a lot of masking?
If I did, well, yes, I definitely did. But it was not conscious. I consciously started masking in 6th grade. And I remember that, consciously trying to explore things that were not interesting to me just because my peers were interested, listening to MTV instead of my own music. So I would, have something to talk about, watching 90210 and shows I hated that I thought were stupid just to have something to talk about, because everybody was talking about it. So yeah, I definitely put the mask on purpose starting in 6th grade. But before that, if I did, it was unconscious. I don't remember doing it.
Was it uncomfortable to do that, or was it exhausting to do that?
It was exhausting, but I would say it wasn't uncomfortable. It actually, it made me more comfortable because I could fit in, but it was exhausting. It's not something I could have kept up that long.
And then do you still find yourself masking in certain situations now, or social situations?
Yes. So when I'm around other parents, if when I go to the kids' schools, you want to put on a front for their schools. But nowadays, I don't usually have to mask. I'm pretty much myself wherever I go. I have friends and family that they just know me as me. I don't feel like I have to. And it's too hard for me to mask anyway. It's just really hard now. The older I get, the harder it is to be fake.
I think that happens for everyone.
Yeah.
People are so free and they say what they want.
Exactly.
You no longer have to be proper and communicate the way people want you to.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's a lot of freedom in that, and really being yourself, your authentic self, and communicating how you want.
Exactly.
So let's talk about sharing the diagnosis. Do you share your children's diagnosis to others?
Only when it's necessary. Obviously, you can tell they're different, but I only do it when it's necessary.
And what would be a time that's necessary?
If you, well, in the educational or medical format, it's usually necessary, or those people usually know. But I think it's only when it's really necessary. Like I don't feel like I should have to explain my children's traits in a general public setting.
Right. Because I generally, like for me, like you said, I will share my diagnosis with their medical providers, their doctors, their dentists, their allergy doctor, because I need people to understand if they don't respond the way you expect them to, or if you're talking to them and they don't necessarily speak back, so they can be aware, or if they don't interact with you, or if they really refuse, but you need them to get their teeth cleaned.
Yeah.
Let's understand and try to figure out an alternate way to communicate.
Exactly.
And I also think I share it sometimes as part of to keep them safe. Because when my husband and I, we were outnumbered all the time. So if we were somewhere and, interacting with people, I wanted people around us to know, because if one of them took off, I don't need to just watch my child run by. I might need
Yeah.
you to help me get them back.
Yeah.
So for me, safety was a
Yeah.
big concern in that.
I wrote something on my device about that.
If necessary, definitely share. But try not to do so in front of your child. Or if you have to at the moment, watch your child's reaction. They may not mind, or they may not like it. That's very kid-specific and mostly age-specific. Kids at certain ages tend to be more self-conscious, like preteens and teens. But every kid is different in preferences. With all things, look to your child's reaction as the most important clue. But this is why working on communication consistently is also important, so these preferences can be clearly expressed eventually.
So I never talked about autism and children in front of me that very recently, because, well, I haven't explained to them yet, and I wanted to get your take on that. When is a good time to show autism?
Okay.
Hi, right. Can I call you back? Can I call you? Yeah, I'm just in like a session thing, but
As soon as they know. Like I said above, you will hear about yourself, whether said about you that you overhear, or someone will tell you to your face. Often, it's just better to have an accurate label to understand why you do what you do, than to hear or be told that everything you do is strange. And you will eventually notice the differences anyway. Some kids are very astute and notice earlier than others. It causes less anxiety to be told why, whether a kid speaks or not. Especially if they can't speak or communicate because they can't ask clarifying questions. They need and deserve the explanations even more, but tend to get it less.
Yeah, I agree. You never want your child, excuse me, to be caught off guard and someone else knows, or they call them a name and they don't understand.
Yeah, and that happens a lot. Well, but generally, people don't understand how much their kids, or especially their autistic kids, absorb the sounds around them and the information around them. And like I said before, I could hear a voice in a different room and it sounds like it's in my ear. And if a kid is sitting outside the doctor's office, or, they hear their parents talking on the phone about, or, talking to somebody else, they're hearing and understanding what's going on. So you want to tell them what's going on first before they're hearing all the stuff about themselves. And it's not one conversation you're going to have. They're going to gain more understanding about themselves throughout the years. You're going to consistently talk about it with them. So there's no pressure. There should be no pressure about how to tell them. Just tell them, because it's not going to be the first time and they're not going to understand right away. So just tell them immediately, and then keep telling them, and they'll keep asking questions. And if they can't ask questions, then that's why it's important to explain the different things that are going on around them.
And two, you don't want them to feel like they're different and don't know why, and then uncomfortable, because you're going to get to the age, that middle school age, that preteen age, where, it's difficult to understand your feelings and your emotions, and you think something's wrong, but you're not sure. So in a sense, it is better to tell them earlier than let them go through that confusion about themselves.
Yeah, and I would say even way before middle school, that confusion sets in when you are constantly told you're different and constantly feel you're different. I mean, I remember knowing in kindergarten I was different than the other kids.
So let's talk about parents and their feelings and about the diagnosis. Because personally, I never had an issue with it. With my oldest is 7. He got diagnosed, and I remember I was upset for like a couple minutes, like less than 5 minutes, because I knew it, but I didn't know it. So it was never for me upset about the diagnosis. I was past that. And he was already getting services, but it's like, man, I knew something was there, but I'm doing all the steps. I did the checklist at the pediatrician's office, and he passed the checklist, but I'm still like, I think it's something, but I'm not sure. So to get the diagnosis, I was more of a relief, upset, like, finally, I get it. This is great. But I don't understand parents who grieve the diagnosis. What are your thoughts on that?
So when it comes to grieving, that should be something for a person who has died, and your kids have not died. And I know we say we're supposed to, feel all the feelings and let the feelings pass. But for me, it's the mindset that creates those feelings in the first place that I don't like. I don't like that in our society we set our kids' lives before they're even born, and we start planning out their lives and how they're going to be. And I don't think that's appropriate to do for any parent. I think you should just be happy with the child that you have, as long as they don't have anything that's going to kill them,
Right.
But you can say you're overwhelmed, you don't know what's going on with the process, you just don't understand, but to say you're grieving for the child that didn't come out, that to me, it's just hurtful. It's hurtful to hear, and I constantly hear it. I take it very personally every time I hear it. And I don't know how all these autistic kids are on social media and parents are out there talking about grieving their own children. Like, I know all these kids are seeing that said about themselves. Like, what are they thinking about? Like, what kind of self-esteem are they having? Listening to other parents talk about how they're grieving for their child. They're thinking like, well, did my parents grieve? Like, to me, it's so strange, and it's so common, and I don't understand how it can be accepted, that idea.
I hear you. It's an interesting thing to have so many negative emotions wrapped up in your child being who they are.
Yes, exactly.
Nothing to be, you don't know who your child is going to be or what they're going to become. Our jobs are just to raise them as they are. And hopefully they will exceed our wildest expectations no matter what their abilities are. But a diagnosis is nothing to be ashamed of. My mantra is, don't be ashamed of the diagnosis. The shame is not getting help. So they're just your child. They are still perfect. And they have gifts that you're yet to unlock. Like you said.
Exactly.
Art. That's amazing.
It's a whole different world that we are experiencing and that we are in and that we see, that, and we can tell people who are not like us do not see this whole separate world. There is nothing to be sad about. It's just that you can you have a new world that you're joining. Like for all the deficits you see, you're also not seeing the benefits. You're thinking all deficits in this life, but this life is not full of deficits. This life is just a regular life, and there's actually a lot of benefits that parents get that I hear. Like for one, parents are finally hit to their own sensory issues because they have kids that they have to pay attention for, so they have to notice their own sensory issues. An autistic person can never go around all our lives without knowing our sensory needs. So that's something that we know and we can see in y'all, and it's just something that we live as like a world of benefits and not deficits. You know, it's just a different world.
Yet the same. So, you know, we need to be able to just accept our kids and see what happens, because it could be a very difficult thing. So let's talk about, I know we're running short on time, so we'll kind of go a little quickly through these last few questions just so we can wrap up. Let's talk about those misinformed professionals, for those poor parents who have had doctors tell them that their children will never walk, talk, basically live on their own. What would you like to tell doctors about autism?
Okay. This is a big issue for me because I am studying to be a doctor, and I feel like I can help educate doctors properly. So
Doctors should regard autism as predominantly a movement disorder and sensory difference. If the movement and motor control problems were accurately discussed as the reason people have trouble speaking, getting dressing, feeling their bladders, etc., and not a behavior or mental disorder, there's no such thing as no motivation to do these things. The reason is that it's difficult to get the body to these things. Our bodies are consistently fighting us from the inside. When we are being destructive, that's not behavior. That's a body issue. All autistic people should have MRIs and EEGs, because many of us will have aggressive behavior or regression, but it is actually due to seizures. A huge portion of us have epilepsy.
That is huge. I love how you just said all about the body. Because sometimes as parents, as adults, we want to treat the behavior, not the cause of the behavior.
yes, that's the biggest problem I see with therapies and with a lot of these interventions that go on. It's not about the behavior, it's the reason for the behavior, what's causing the underlying behavior. And most people don't understand, to be honest, whether it's teachers, doctors, all these professionals, they don't understand what lies behind the behavior. And a lot of times it's just a body-brain disconnection.
So, I mean, some behaviors are, they're just bad behavior is still bad behavior, but there is an element to certain things that your child may do that need to be looked at deeper than just, that child can't do this, or that child keeps hitting me, but you need to really figure out the root.
Right.
And then what would you say to anyone whose doctor has ever told them what their children can and cannot do?
Okay.
Most of that is part of the physical disability that autism causes. People can adapt around those things with assistance and technology. The sooner you look for ways around the disability and not try to change it, independence will be easier. But I will say that exercise and ensuring communication is worked on every single day will make everything much, much easier. There are so many innovative ways or assistive devices that disabled people use to get around things that parents are not aware of because they don't get to know any disabled or autistic people.
And that's a big thing. I mean, knowing that you should exercise just like everyone else, but like you and I talked before, talking is exhausting.
Yeah,
And that's partially why you use your device.
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly why. I also, to go back to what you're saying before,
Mhm.
Parents should get in the habit of not listening to neurotypical professionals about their autistic children. They don't have crystal balls. It doesn't even make sense to an autistic person telling someone that. It's illogical. I know autistic people, speaking and non-speaking, that have long-term relationships, great jobs, or careers, have great lives. We adapt as we get older. And with communication, there's nothing that autistic people can do. The sooner communication is started, the sooner things get much easier for everyone.
So I'm going to move forward to this slide here, speech and communication, because communication is bigger than people think. It's verbal, yes, but there's also the non-verbal, right?
right.
And non-verbal can consist of so many different things.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say nonverbal. Actually, in our community, nonverbal means not being able to come up with words whatsoever or any kind of language. So there are non-speaking forms of communication like sign language, like the device that I'm using, writing pen, pad. A lot of times me and my kids will just write on a dry erase board because we have days where some of us can't deal with voices at all. So there's all kinds of different ways, but to put the emphasis on speech is really missing the mark when it comes to communication. First of all, a lot of times speech doesn't come until other communication channels are opened. So you might be putting the cart before the horse. Like for me, for instance, I didn't learn how to speak until I learned to write. I couldn't say my own words. It was all echolalia or scripting. That's how I got my communication out. But once I learned to write, then I learned how to put the sounds together in my head and form my own speech. So I think a lot of parents and professionals, if they're not getting into different forms of communication and trying to work on speech, they're actually going in the wrong order. Communication is more important. Complex communication is more important. So not just requesting needs and things, like complex communication, your thoughts and feelings need to be worked on every single day. Because, for neurotypical people, they expect to speak every single day. That's their form of communication. So we need our form of communication.
So in a sense, we need to be open to whatever form of communication is comfortable for our children and for any other person, autistic person, not just expect that since we're speaking as our communication, that's the way you're going to be able to do it, and we'll feel comfortable doing it at any given time.
Right. And I think a lot of parents and professionals cause some setbacks or slight regressions and other things by focusing too much on speech. When speech is difficult, it's very difficult. And it's not, sometimes if I'm having to speak, I'm not saying what I'm actually wanting to say from my heart or from my brain. I'm saying whatever comes out of my mouth. So it's not only is it not difficult, sometimes it's not accurate.
So when you look at this slide here, what do you want people to know about this?
So as we say in the autistic community is listening does not have a look. So if your kid is looking somewhere else, that does not mean they're not paying attention. In fact, it's easier for me to pay attention to what I'm hearing when I'm not looking at the person saying it. My brain cannot handle dealing with what's going on with somebody's face or eyes and hearing their message at the same time. So I think a lot of people think we're not paying attention when we are. And oftentimes our paying attention looks much different from their typical signs of paying attention.
And we need to be open as parents and educators and whoever to realizing that, okay, because I know I'm bad about that with my boys. Look at me, look at me. Well, okay. And then, like you said, I watch their eyes go a different direction as I'm talking.
Yeah.
I'm specifically speaking in front of them because, you know, we want them to read our face and our emotions. And if you want them to hear you, you need to let them hear you however that looks for them, right?
Mm-hmm. And it's not like we're not paying attention to the face. If people understood how much visual processing it takes to look at somebody's face and eyes, for us, it's like a huge sensory issue. So it's like you're saying a million things. How are we supposed to hear what's coming out of your mouth when your face is also saying a million things as well? Like, what part do you want us to pay attention to, your words or your face? So if your kid is eyes are drifting, that's probably them taking in your message versus them not listening. So when they're looking at you, they're not hearing a word you're saying actually.
I will say if I take away nothing else, that is ingrained in my brain from now on. Because I watch it. I watch it happen every time I am really frustrated and I'm trying to explain something. So I'm going to, from now on, relax that and let my child hear the way he's going to hear instead of making it conform to the way that I want him to hear. Now, is there anything that you'd like to share about this slide here for anyone whose children has a communication device?
So if you have, first of all, every autistic person needs a communication device or a separate communication form. There should be none of that speaking only, because you don't know if you're getting your kid's accurate words. Every person should have alternate forms of communication. I think even if you're neurotypical, because you guys get sore throats, you guys are in crowded places at times. Like, how do you communicate when you can't talk? So everybody should have that as a form of an alternate communication. But people need to stop waiting for these schools, stop waiting for these counties to give their kids alternate forms of communication. If you have a tablet, there are free devices that you can use, and model it. Don't expect your kids to use it right away, because we don't expect kids to come out using speech. Kids see like thousands or hundreds of thousands of hours of speech before they can produce it. And that's how it needs to be with AAC or any other type of language, whether it's sign language, whether it's using a letter board where somebody points and spells, or they type on a tablet, or they use pictures. These things need to be given as soon as possible. And we don't have to wait for so-called professionals to implement these devices. So just always use a different device. I'll always use a different form of communication, and you use it. Don't expect the kids to use it right away.
Yeah, because mine never liked using theirs. Let's talk about stimming really quickly for those of us that don't understand. Can you explain what it is and give us an idea of what it looks like?
So imagine you have a whole bunch of pressure building up in your body, and somehow you need to get that out. And that's what stimming is. And it also is a great distraction for when the environment is getting too under or overwhelming.
So that being said, it's not a negative thing, it's a coping mechanism.
It is a coping mechanism, definitely. It is necessary. We have to do it more simply because our sensory environment is different. So the way our body is moving is based on what you don't see our senses are manifesting inside of us. So how we stim is how our body is feeling inside.
I love the way you put that because I've seen people stim. Like mine don't do anything noticeable. Like I said, my oldest will sometimes still start to wiggle his fingers, so like have to each touch each finger to each other. When he starts to get upset or uncomfortable, so I have noticed that. So, but we as parents need to understand you don't need to make it stop, or if you want to make it stop, try to figure out what the source of the stimming is. Like, what has got your child so anxious or upset or uncomfortable? And
or happy.
Right, true,
You
happy.
can be happy too. And I don't know why anybody would want to stop happy stimming.
Exactly, but we have to know our children well enough to know the difference.
Yes, that's very true. You do have to do a lot of observation.
And don't let anyone try to tell you what your child stimming is or is not, right?
Yeah, because we all have different reasons to be stim. Like I slap my hands when I'm anxious, but my son did it for happiness. So I cannot look at, even me, an autistic person with an autistic brother and kids, I cannot look at an autistic person and say why they're stimming. I can just say that they're stimming. But I can't tell why or what's going on. Only they know.
Right.
And if you want to know, again, that communication piece is important. Everything you want to know that you can't from your child, they can tell you eventually once they get that complex communication going on.
And I'd also like to stress about communication is that just because your child isn't speaking doesn't mean they don't understand what's happening around them. It doesn't mean they don't hear you.
Oh, they hear and they understand. I heard a mother the other day. She was surprised that her child did something, and it was because she was told by her child's doctor that they only understood tone. And I was like, what? Like, that may indeed be true, but there's no doctor, no person that can tell you what your child feels or thinks or hears or understands. Nobody can know that but your child. Nobody.
Absolutely. So we need to give our children the time and ability to communicate in their own way and not accept anyone telling us that anything negative about them because they don't know what's happening inside that child, because none of us can know until that child wants us to know.
Exactly. There's no way for anybody else to know what's going on inside me without me telling them.
And I would encourage anyone that has any kind of professional that does that to you to seek another professional, because they're not hearing you or wanting to understand you or your child. And that's a problem. because they can't help you if they're not accepting of who you are, and they're just going to make negative assumptions.
Yeah, and if they've never ever talked to an autistic person, especially an adult, because we've had a lot of time to process why we do things, and if these people have never talked to any of them, they only talk to other professionals. Like, how would they know? Like, it's like the people who don't know teaching more people not to know.
Right, exactly. So I want to skip over real quickly. So can you just tell us a little bit about what it was like in the employment sector for you as an autistic? What kind of issues you may have had?
Work has been difficult. For one, I have epilepsy and can't plan seizures, but the side effects of the medicine to prevent fatiguing. But normally, I have had issues with the social structures at work. Primarily, being bullied for not fitting in, or just things like being unable to make proper facial expressions. I have been fired for that. And another time, almost fired.
So has it been difficult for you to manage the work relationships?
Yes.
And can you tell us anything that was in particular that made it difficult?
Offices have had very loud lighting and very bright lightning. It makes me very tired because only I am hearing it and everyone is going as normal, talking, emailing, needing attention, and I need to take constant breaks from that noise and the wobble of the lights. I have a hard time transitioning, so sometimes I am late leaving, but late coming. I get all my work done, but hours are hard to confine myself to because my energy is uneven. I get bursts and sometimes lulls.
And because of the way I have to function in that environment, it makes a lot of people upset.
Right. Because okay, I mean, I know we have, so when you go into a work situation, does your supervisor know, or does it you share with any of HR people about the fact that you're sick, or no?
No, that's not something I would share if I didn't have to, because there's a lot of discrimination that comes with that.
Because that's a hard thing to figure out. It's like you get a job, you go into it thinking, yes, I'm capable of doing it, and you don't know what the environment's going to be like for you, right?
Right. Yeah.
And not only that, there's still all these social norms and ways that you're supposed to interact in the workplace, in an office setting, that frankly are exhausting for anybody.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's where, it's like I said, I have a hard time masking in adulthood, and it's somewhere where you have to mask. Even us as Black people have to code switch, and that can be exhausting. So I'm having to mask being autistic and code switching at the same time, and it's hard being a Black woman and autistic, having to do all the three different masks, having to put on the three different masks of, being a woman, being Black, and then being autistic.
Because the fact of the matter is, there are preconceived notions of who we are when we walk in. So you have to deal with that. You have to deal with the known, and then they don't even know about the other thing that you have to deal with. So it's tricky. It's really tricky. But I would say for anybody out there that is concerned about their child being employable or being able to get a job, it is possible. There are just concerns that and issues in the workplace that they may need to have to figure out how to navigate.
Yes, and it's actually gotten a little bit better with some employers being aware. It's just I haven't worked since 2013 because of those issues.
So there are things, it is changing, and workplaces are becoming more aware, and that's definitely a positive transition that they make. Hopefully, it gets better, there's more awareness, and there's more of an understanding of what it is in the workplace that makes it uncomfortable for an autistic person.
Yes, and us adults are fighting for the kids coming up now. So it's going to continuously get better, and they're going to keep fighting.
And that's a positive that we all needed to hear. It really is, because we're all going to get there. Our children are going to get there. And hopefully you all will pave the way. Because there's always a generation, there's always people that pave the way for the younger ones.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk real quickly about parenting our kids for the futures, the transitions to life after high school, life skills, employment. Are there any thoughts that you want to share on these things?
Yes. So this is immediately things you can do now to help them for their future.
Get on your state's waivers immediately and sign up for the many waivers and grants that are given throughout the year by your states, local governments, and national and local organizations. There's a lot of funding out there for assistive devices and technologies. Plus, little things like diapers and adaptive clothing to help independence. The main thing that prepares people is complex communication, because the goal is to figure out what your loved one has in mind or goals to do. Their goals are the keys to their happiness. And how can you know that without them having a way to tell you?
So when it comes to, there are regular skills, life skills that are necessary for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So one parent should start there, at least with the basic skills that we're all going to need to be able to function on their own. But there are, like you mentioned, there are opportunities out there for us to be supported, our children to be supported through grants and devices. And everyone needs to start sharing that information, first of all, and getting access to it. And we all need to be aware of what we need to look for.
There's so many things that can help independence that people aren't aware of. And I think some of these ADLs or adult daily life skills or whatever, I think some people put too much emphasis on those when maybe that person might need more help learning that. So a big thing in the autistic community is a class called Life Skills. It's not a good thing. It teaches like tedious daily tasks, like over and over, and it leaves out purposeful education for things like actually succeeding in life as an adult, being able to make money. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of people who are disabled with their bodies, just like autistic people, like with cerebral palsy and other physical disorders. And for non-autistic disabled people, we tend to create innovative technologies and things to help people with those, or get them aids or assistance. But for autistic people, we tend to overdo the learning of those skills, but never learn things like college prep skills or the higher level math, or any math for that matter. So I think if you're putting too much focus on trying to be independent, but you're not teaching real education, then you're still not going to have an independent person. I think non-disabled people look at independence differently than we do. You guys mean complete independence, I think, like being able to live by yourself and, you know, going to a job. But there are other things that require independence, like being able to live your goals. I mean, what about your happiness and, you know, fulfill your dreams and communicate your wants and needs and desires for the future. Those are just as important.
So maybe that's what we need to be doing, is figuring out what our children's goals are and helping them shape them and figuring out what they look like.
Yes, and that will give them the motivation, and they will teach you how to help them be independent. They will teach you how to help them. They know what their body problems are. For autistic people, you can't tell. Like, they can easily tell for somebody who has cerebral palsy. They can look at the brain or the way they walk, you know, but for an autistic person, our bodies and brains are sometimey or uneven. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But when the autistic person can tell you exactly how to help them, then it's a whole different game. And I think that's what we need to focus on more than all these little tedious tasks.
And you know, I would say to parents, don't let your fears interfere with your child's learning at any level. Because the more the parents do for their children, the less you can know what your child's capable of, the less they can communicate and share with you their needs.
And the less they know what they're capable of. I see a lot of autistic kids and even adults that I know that they have limits in their minds versus what they can actually do. And those limits are placed on them by society. And, you know, you're raised by your parents in society most and foremost. So they're the ones who need to teach you that there's nothing that you can't do, and that needs to be taught from the beginning. And then just figure out what steps you need to take to get what you need to be done. I'm not saying any of this is easy. It is simple, like it's a simple plan. None of it's easy though, because you're not only are we going to fight our bodies, but obviously the parents have a lot of work to do when a child has an out of control body, and it makes it stressful for the parents as well. But that stress doesn't have to last forever. The main thing parents should be working on is communication, so the kids can tell them how to help them best.
So that leads us to this next slide. Give us your thoughts on how to show support for children.
So this is actually by a friend of mine. She's an autism researcher, and she has a non-speaking 11-year-old son. But her son wrote a book when he was 8 years old, and he's been able to communicate since he was 6 or 7. And these are a lot of things that she's learned from him. He's only 11 or 12, I think, but yeah. So, go ahead.
His words?
Sorry?
Were these more his words?
No, they're her words, but stuff that she's learned from raising him and him being able to communicate.
So for anyone that can't read it, so what all students with disabilities should hear: you are loved and are worthy of love. You belong in this world as you are. I will support you by helping others understand this. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. I will model this behavior for others in how I speak and respond to you. I will stand by your side when other people and systems fail you. In spite of my best efforts, I will make mistakes. Please forgive me when my judgment falters. You are capable of great things. You deserve a life of fulfillment and purpose. You got this.
Yes. And that one where it says, in spite of my best efforts, I will make mistakes. I think too many parents are stressed out and worried that all these little things that they're going to do determines their child's future. And I mean, that's true for every child, right? But for some reason, parents of autistic and disabled kids think they should be doing something extra, something more, or having skills that the world did not prepare them for. No autistic child is going to fault you when they get older for not knowing things you didn't know. We understand the world more than you think. So all these parents who are afraid to make mistakes and afraid they're not doing enough and feeling guilty, they can just stop all that, because all parents make mistakes. And if you tell your kids that early on, they're not going to hold you to the fire unless you were abusive, and that's a whole different story. But if you know you're not being abusive, just chill out.
So I want to skip ahead to this one because this is one of my favorite slides. And it's really more about when parents should pay attention. So the times my autistic child seems to be struggling the most are the times I have to stop what I'm doing and focus directly on my child. Turn off the stove, DVR, whatever I'm watching, put down the cell phone, or open the bathroom door and say, come sit with me. All the little meltdowns in times of distress are a way of saying, I need something, but can't find a way to tell you. I have to stop what I'm doing and just listen. This slide just speaks volumes. I mean, there's really not a lot left to say, but go ahead and get your thoughts on this one. I just love this slide.
I just think that when a child is having a meltdown, or they're having little stresses, parents need to pay extra attention, because oftentimes we communicate in much different ways, not with our words. So other behaviors are ways of communicating.
And then managing feelings. What to do when you feel anxious. What are your thoughts on this slide?
So I wrote, so when it comes to managing feelings, parents need to first observe what happens when their children have certain feelings, like what are their bodies doing, what kind of body language is going on, stimming, what happened before the behavior took place. And then they need to teach their kids what those signs are that they see. So we don't always know our internal signals. It's a sensory issue. It's called interoception. So we don't always know what's happening inside of us. So it's important for our caregivers to pay attention to our signs and signals, but also tell us what our signs and signals are. So we know, we're not always going to be able to decipher. And then from there, have tools ready. So we have a lot of stimming things, trampoline, fidget toys, exercise, what have you. My kids know that there are things available, quiet spaces, so that they can take care of their feelings and anxieties.
And then finally, parents, please, 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 please be encouraged. It's okay if you fall apart sometimes. Tacos fall apart and we still love them. And Tiffany, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, just I feel like in the trenches of raising your kids and dealing with certain behaviors and things, it can get a little much. I mean, even for me, and I know what's going on, and I probably have a little bit more insight, and it still gets overwhelming. You're not supposed to never be overwhelmed, and it's okay. And just be overwhelmed to get through it and try to figure out what you can do better and come back the next day. Exactly. I think people get mired in their frustrations and feel like it's going to be their life forever, but it's not. All these things are temporary.
Absolutely, and we'll weather every storm because our children need us, and they need us to be, and they need to be aware that we're okay. They don't need to worry about us worrying about them. So we need
and we feel that. We do feel that if you're you have extra focus or anxiety about this, we feel that, and we may not be able to put it into words or understand what's going on with our parents. So we feel when they're stressed. We feel other people's emotions and energies much stronger. That's a part of the sensory environment, and we feel that. So I would say if anything parents can do to help their kids is to take care of themselves first.
Self-care is always important. Don't ever forget. You need to take a moment, whether or not it's step outside and take a deep breath and, just feel the outside and the air and the sunshine or whatever. But don't forget, just take care of yourself because your kids are going to need you.